Hi, I'm Pat Kiernan. Glad you could be with us for today's edition of Pat's Papers. We go through the nation's newspapers to bring you the highlights. Here's our top story today. NBC made an official announcement this morning, but the papers were all over it last night. The LA Times calls this a radical change in traditional network TV programming. NBC will put Jay Leno on 5 nights a week at 10 p.m. This accomplishes a few things. It makes way for the planned Conan O'Brien move into the Tonight Show slot at 11:30 each night. It keeps Leno at NBC, which eliminates the threat that he could take his audience to another network. And as the New York Times version of the story quantifies, it makes it a lot less expensive for NBC to program that final hour of the primetime schedule. A typical 1-hour scripted show costs $3 million an episode. NBC can produce a week of Jay Leno for about $2 million. This is on the front page of many of the newspapers this morning. The New York Post says the new show won't be the 2-night show, it'll be the 10-night show. After a military fighter jet crash yesterday, it must have been a tough morning for the photo editors at the San Diego Union Tribune to choose a picture. There were so many. The photo they chose for the front page shows the destruction in a neighborhood from a distance, a crash that claimed the lives of 3 people on the ground. The pilot of the jet ejected to safety. The story says barely 50 feet separated life from death for 2 families. Leading the Washington Post this morning is the offer by 5 September 11 suspects yesterday to confess. The men are being held at Guantanamo. The common thinking on this is that they believe they will achieve martyrdom if they are sentenced to death, and they may be trying to get that done before the end of the Bush presidency. The bailout of the automakers has been front-page news all over the country. Nowhere is it more closely followed than in Detroit. The Detroit News notes that Washington will likely appoint a car czar to oversee the industry if Congress moves ahead with the plan for the $15 billion bailout loan to the automakers. The New York Times, in a news analysis on the front page, says this deal sounds perilously close to a nationalization of the auto industry. The government would have a right to veto transactions over $25 million. Congress would get a report on the company's progress every 15 days. People may be pulling back on fancy restaurant meals in a tough economy, but they're not pulling back on McDonald's. The Miami Herald, one of many papers with the November sales numbers from the fast food chain, sales up 7.7%, a very strong performance. The San Francisco Chronicle reporting on its front page about a study at UC Berkeley and Harvard on cancer due to exposure to diesel fumes. Dock workers and short-haul truckers who do a lot of loading and unloading are thought to be at the greatest risk. The Chronicle also has a story about the health benefits of nuts. A study finds eating a handful of nuts a day, along with a Mediterranean diet rich in fruit and vegetables, can significantly reduce the risk of heart disease. Spanish researchers found nuts were even better than olive oil in reducing heart risk. Still in California, the Sacramento Bee reporting on the state of California and the fact that it's just days away from a government shutdown that would halt road and school projects. This, at the moment, still primarily a political story as lawmakers battle over a budget. The Chicago Sun-Times has a headline about its rival on the front page. It's turmoil at the Tower. Just a year after Sam Zell took control of the Chicago Tribune and its parent company, he has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. He says operations will continue at Tribune's 12 newspapers and 23 television stations. One of those papers is the Baltimore Sun, which puts news about its own business affairs at the top of the page. Not, though, the only bankruptcy story in Baltimore. Also on that front page, the Baltimore Opera has canceled its remaining productions. It has filed for Chapter 11. It's not even in a position to give refunds to ticket holders. From the science section of the New York Times, is the world around them too much for our kids' hearing? 1 child in 8 in America suffers some degree of noise-related hearing loss. It's not just because they're listening to loud music on their iPods or video games that are too loud. Even places like school lunchrooms. 2 stories about air travel from the Wall Street Journal, a story in the Personal Journal section from business travel writer Scott McCartney, who says airlines have made it so much tougher to get a good award out of their frequent flyer programs that those programs really are not the loyalty tool they once were. They put some numbers on this. You used to be able to get about 2 cents worth of value for every frequent flyer mile. On average, people get just 1.2 cents out of each mile now. Speaking of flying, an interesting piece in the Journal about Emirates, the Dubai airline that has expanded so aggressively. Flight attendants are required to do things like attend beauty training, and they have to maintain a certain weight. The story points out if these requirements were in place elsewhere, they'd likely be considered discriminatory. The race is on to build deep-sea wind farms, giant turbines on platforms like oil rigs. The Miami Herald says 78% of energy consumed in the U.S. goes to people either on the East Coast or the West Coast or near the Great Lakes, and all of these areas have tremendous potential for this type of wind energy. New York Daily News, hang on to your straps. The story about seatless subway cars being tested in Boston. New York has a similar plan. They removed the seats so there is room for more people. A car that holds 202 people with seats could hold 291 with everybody standing. Move over Nike. USA Today reporting on a plan by Under Armour to launch a line of running shoes on Super Bowl weekend in January. The company's CEO says Under Armour is the next great athletic brand. Nike says it remains connected to today's youth and says it thrives on competition. Finally, news about your pet. As it turns out, dogs have a sense of injustice. The San Francisco Chronicle reports today on research at the University of Vienna. They played a game of shaking hands with test dogs, and they found that if they failed to reward one dog while rewarding another, the unrewarded dog was bitter and often refused to play the game anymore. And that's a report for today. I'm Pat Kiernan. We do this every day. patspapers.com is where you will find the complete list of all of the stories we featured today, along with links to the individual newspaper websites.